information warfare will today dominate to a very great extent the aspect of psychological warfare. We can't say with any degree of confirmation that the Red Corridor has had a huge proxy footprint of our northern neighbors. But the potential is always there. India is vulnerable to a 2.5 front war. The fact that the Chinese consistently draw us onto the northern borders from Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh, one of the major reasons is they do not want us to be maritime in our thinking. But if they don't have it, there will be windows in which you'll find the capability of the terrorists to strike and not be neutralized so easily will be there. What they did in 2020, I still believe, was essentially messaging, essentially tying you down, trying to tell you that you are too ambitious and perhaps you do not have the capability which China has. Our unity, political unity and consensus, because politics is all about differences. But at the end of the day, there has to be a bottom line, below which you will not go. It must be remembered by society that fighting subconventional war is not the responsibility of the Indian Army. It is a responsibility of every citizen.
Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi Achint. As you all can see, I have with me Lieutenant General Syed Hasnain to discuss the changing face of warfare that we see in front of us today. General Hasnain is, although a very renowned speaker and a renowned voice when it comes to national security of this country, I'd still like to take a moment to introduce him to all of us. Lieutenant General Syed Hasnain, PVSM, UYSM, AVSM, SM, VSM, and Bar to ASM, is a retired general of the Indian Army. His last assignment in service was the military secretary to the Indian Army, and prior to that, he commanded Indian Army's 15 Corps. We all know where that stands in Jammu and Kashmir, amongst other very, very important assignments. In 2018, General Hasnain was appointed as the Chancellor of the Central University in Kashmir. Today, the General is known for his very balanced thoughts that he expresses in various talk forums, as well as his very, very interesting articles. Thank you, sir, for giving me this opportunity to talk to you about the changing face of warfare.
Jai Hind, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Jai Hind, sir. So I'd like to begin with a very, very simple question. And you've written about unconventional warfare some time ago. So that's where this whole thought process started up. And I really thought that the warfare game has actually changed completely. So my first question is, that conventional warfare in its face is ever evolving, from the cavalry charges that we saw to the tank battles of the lumbering tank battles, if I may ask, of the First World War, to the aircraft battles, the battleships, the aircraft carriers, and so on and so forth. In your opinion, sir, where do you see conventional warfare in the next coming generation of relations between two countries? And keeping in mind the Indian context, as well as the nuclear umbrella that we stay in, sir.
Thank you for a very interesting question, Adi. But for this question, my response will necessarily involve a little historical perspective too. And I always like to tell my audiences that 1973, perhaps, the Yom Kippur War of 1973, October, between the Arabs and the Israelis, the Egyptians and the Israelis, so to say, was the one to which my mind always goes when you say the changing face of war. Because that really saw a changing face of war. You saw the coming of the anti-tank guided missile. You saw the coming in of the surface-to-air missile, the SAM-6 batteries, if you remember. And that changed the whole context of warfare. 17 years later, in 1990, we saw Gulf War I. And this time, it was not so much of a land battle. It was much more in the air. It was all about the Air Force. It was all about unrestricted air power. And at the same time, the introduction of information warfare with the entry of CNN into the drawing rooms of communities all over the world. And then we saw in 1999 the Indian Kargil offensive and the manner in which we recaptured heights at 16 and 17,000 feet. And then subsequently, you saw Gulf War II, which did not see such a major change. But I think of late 2020, the war which has just taken place between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and the coming in of the armed drone, and the whole concept of swarming of drones, which we were seeing for some time, this is at least brought in some of the sub-elements of the kind of conventional wars that you're going to see in the future. But having said that, it's going to be technology driven. It's going to be technology driven, and we can see from 73 to 2020 how technologies have changed. One of the major aspects of technology which will obviously bring to bear its footprint into the whole conventional battle is the cyber aspect. Because you see, command and control, information, the whole computer system, the C4I paradigm is all contingent upon a kind of a environment where this undisturbed networks are available to you. Now, if networks are paralyzed, if networks are interfered with, then it creates a major problem as far as warfighting is concerned. And almost all modern systems, leave out command and control, even everything today will be based upon the World Wide Web or on some forms of local web networks. And that is going to play a very, very major role. But having said that, I will also say that information warfare will today dominate to a very great extent the aspect of psychological warfare, dwelling on governments, dwelling on populations, dwelling on troops on the ground, all of them. I mean, everyone is going to be targeted by these various aspects of information warfare. And then the reach of air power. The reach of air power is going to be used for interdiction and to a very large part economic warfare, destruction of industry, destruction of infrastructure, so that a tremendous effort has to be brought in by the adversary to rebuild his economy. These are some of the issues which will come, and the last of them, which I think is particularly very important in our context with the Chinese, and I'm sure we will discuss this subsequently, is the whole issue of missile. The Chinese have invested a tremendous amount in missiles, long-range missiles. And we can find the second artillery, which the Chinese call, not only in the tactical battlefield, but well behind the targeting of the adversary. In this case, we in India, we are the adversary, targeting our logistics and our infrastructure in a huge way. All this is going to play a major role in future wars. Although a lot of people say that conventional wars are out of fashion. But I'd still say that decisive wars are ultimately conventional in nature. Some conventional wars, and you can see what's happening in Afghanistan. The Americans have left a nation completely in disarray at the moment. So a decisive war ultimately has to be a conventional.
That's interesting, sir. So basically what you're trying to say is going to be a hardcore, the lower end of the warfare that we're going to see in terms of conventional war is going to be more of technology driven by crippling the enemy's capabilities to actually wage war. And that is something very, very interesting that I pull out of what you've explained, because that sounds very scary, because you're actually going to be depleting another person's infrastructure without actually spilling a drop of blood. That's
absolutely
something very, very dangerous, sir.
That's the essence of it. And as I told you, to give you the example, our context with China itself is a very important thing, because here you find that the Chinese infrastructure in Tibet, for example, is widespread. It can't be targeted in that easy manner. But our own infrastructure, which is close up to the Himalayas, right, in all the areas concerned, is all susceptible to that kind of targeting. And therefore, it makes us very, very vulnerable in this kind of a field. And therefore, we need many more ways of thinking as to how to counter the whole threat of missiles from China.
Right. So I think that's very important point to look at. So I'd like to ask you a similar question with regards to sub-conventional warfare that we see around us. And again, I'd like you to help us understand this with one of our very friendly neighbors on the west, and of course, the latest very friendly neighbor on the east as well. How do you see the sub-conventional part of warfare going forward? Looking at deniability being one of the biggest aspects that we see in front of us today, sir.
You see, one aspect, Adi, of sub-conventional warfare is something which is homegrown, comes out of strains in governance, issues of politics and things like that. Many of these exist in various nations. India is a large nation, and we can have many of such problems all over the country. We have diversity. We've got so many faiths. We have so many religions, languages. We have so many different ethnicities with us. So these kind of problems will take place in a nation which is just 70, 75 years old and still in the process of integration. So you can expect all this will happen. But the important aspect here is the proxy part. There are your adversaries exploiting any of these issues within the country and using it for proxy effect, which means essentially that is diluting your overall capability to fight conventional and slowly bleeding you. You see, the whole concept of what our Western neighbor believed in 1977, when he actually conceptualized the whole doctrine of 1,000 cuts, was that it was very difficult for them to match India's conventional army. It was very difficult to match India's conventional economy. So if you can't match your adversary's economy and your adversary's armed forces, your armed strength, what do? You fight small. You fight small, you fight sub-conventional, you fight long, and you fight in a manner in which there is great deniability. And that's everything that Pakistan decided to do in 1977 when Ziaullah came to power. And that's the methodology that they have used against us all this while. These are the essentials of sub-convention, particularly in the context of South Asia. Deniability, proxy support, creation of networks, right? The creation of networks, exploitation of those networks, right? Keeping generational changes in mind. Remember what happened in Jammu and Kashmir with the advent of Burhan Wani in 2012, 2013. And you found that it was clear that there was a generational change taking place at that time. And it was necessary to clamber onto that and exploit it. And that's exactly what Pakistan did. Although by 2016, Burhan Wani was neutralized, was eliminated. That's a different story. So if you want to fight long, you have to be with the tide. If you want to fight effectively, you have to ensure that you have the right networks. Those networks must affect every aspect of society in the areas in which you're fighting sub-conventional. For example, you must have the media on your side. You must have the religious leaders on your side. You must have elements of the bureaucracy on your side. You must penetrate the police forces, right? As long as you can get into these networks, you can fight strongly. And you can ensure that your adversary continues to bleed by 1,000 cuts. This is the kind of concept which our Western neighbor has followed. Now, as far as our northern neighbor and eastern neighbor is concerned, he started a kind of a proxy effort in our northeast. Thereafter, that dwindled to a very great extent. We can't say with any degree of confirmation that the Red Corridor has had a huge proxy footprint of our northern neighbors. But the potential is always there. Remember, the ideology is the same. So the potential is always there. Remember, the purpose of the sub-conventional conflict which is there in the Red Corridor, the purpose which is there for which the Naxalites are fighting this, is the creation of a communist state in India by the year 2046. Started in 1996, 50 years, 2046. That is what their intent is. We cannot say yet whether there's a huge amount of proxy support from the other side or not, but the potential always remains. So therefore, we always keep talking about what is called a 2.5 front war. India is vulnerable to a 2.5 front war. One front is the Pakistan front. The second is the Chinese front. And the third and the half front, which a lot of people are discounting today, but I continue to say, no, it plays a very, very important role. That third front, or that half front, is the front of the Red Corridor, the proxy war in Jammu and Kashmir, and the potential proxy wars in the Northeast. And of course, keeping some aspect of gray zone warfare, committed in as far as the rest of India is concerned. There are minorities, there are different ethnicities that I spoke about, and any of these can be exploited by a very, very alert adversary at any time.
And China is an alert adversary at that. So that's
absolutely. It's totally alert at all times.
It is interesting that you mentioned this because half of the country actually doesn't believe China is so well integrated in terms of its plan to exploit India's weaknesses and its fault lines. We do kind of focus on it for a little bit, but then when the sand kind of settles down, the country looks the other way at the other great issues which our media brings.
Adi, the reason for that is China's strategy, where it concentrates on the border regions. It bought Ladakh, Arunachal, and our attention entirely goes to the border. And our strategic culture somehow is built up into border security is the most important thing, not realizing that in today's warfare and subconventional particularly, it is not the border alone, it is everything inside. You can have the most stable borders and yet be completely hollow inside. So the Chinese have actually exploited this mindset of the Indian state, where they have got such overtly concern from our side onto the borders that we do not look sufficiently internally. Fortunately, things are changing. And yes, today people are paying a lot of attention to things which are happening internally within the rest of India, particularly with technological changes, with social media and things like that.
Yeah. Interesting. And so one of the reasons that you were saying that they are putting our focus towards the border even right now is because they want to actually act the other way around into India with whatever motive that they have. And that is very interesting to me, sir.
At the cost of a little time, but may I say, this is a very interesting aspect which you have raised. The fact that the Chinese consistently draw us onto the northern borders from Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh, one of the major reasons is they do not want us to be maritime in our thinking. They want us to focus on the continental borders, because the vulnerability of China lies in the maritime zone. You see the sea lines of communication going from the Straits of Malacca all the way to the Persian Gulf or to the Suez Canal. These are through the Indian Ocean. Yes. The Indian Ocean is the backyard of India. And if you have a very strong maritime capability, a blue water navy, if you have invested enough funds into this, then over a period of time, you have the potential to control these waters in conjunction with other major navies of the world, which is why so many nations are looking for cooperation with India. On the Indo-Pacific, the whole concept of the Indo-Pacific is that the United States and the Quad nations as they are, they're all looking for cooperation primarily because of India's strategic location in the Indian Ocean.
I absolutely agree with you, sir. As a matter of fact, this is something that I think you've spoken about before as well. I personally call it the challenge between the continental war versus a maritime strategies.
Absolutely.
That is something that we need to work on. Sir, you've also written about this subcontinental warfare that we were talking about recently. And what I understood of your article is that it is also making it possible for kind of, and I don't mean it in a literal sense, lone wolf kind of attacks. But by that, let me explain. It means individuals or entities which are backed by a larger organization, for example, in Pakistan or wherever it would be, to carry out these small scale attacks. And any attack is an attack at the end of it, but if they carry what they did in Jammu, it created a lot of psychological fervor in terms of the attack. Do you see this as the new normal with regards to subconventional warfare, wherein gone are the days of the guys strapping bombs on their chests and driving into convoys or whatever they have to, but it's going to be low intensity attacks with higher psychological effect?
With you completely in the concept that you are explaining, with you completely. But let me give you a little bit of a historical perspective on this too. The whole aspect of the suicide bomber and the suicide attacker. First of all, there's a tremendous amount of difference between the suicide bomber and the suicide attacker. A suicide bomber is one who comes strapped up with explosives or sits in a car strapped up with explosives. The suicide attacker is the one who does not come with explosives on him, but comes armed to the teeth and is willing to fight it out to make a huge impact, which generally means 3 or 4 such people who are generally referred to themselves as the Fidain. You remember the Fidain movement in the Palestinian world, right? They generally call themselves the Fidain. And they like to come in, probably take a couple of soldiers with them, do some kind of a surreptitious action, a sneak attack inside, etc. And make an impact in the media, the information world, to say, see, we are small, but we have the capability to strike and take down so many with us, right? So this is the concept which they are following. Now, as technologies increase, obviously the technology to strike has also developed, but the technology to also prevent has inherently increased too. So the ability to monitor, the ability to neutralize, all these things have developed simultaneously. So over a period of time, we've seen different methodologies being followed. For example, the ISIS. The ISIS is the one which developed the new forms of kinetic attack. For example, the use of large vehicles to drive into hordes of people, into populations somewhere, killing 30, 40 people. It's so simple to do it. You're not carrying explosives. You are not You're not sort of speaking anywhere on mobiles. All you're doing is a very basic coordination, getting into a vehicle and just driving it into something, right? So these kind of lone wolf attacks became very popular about 5 years ago when the ISIS started following them in some of the Western European capitals and in the United States, right? This can continue. This can continue very well as it is, but the arrival of the drone has definitely revolutionized I would say conventional warfare, definitely, but the scope of subconventional warfare to a very great extent. Now you suddenly find that the risk factor, the whole aspect of suicide bombing, you need not follow suicide bombing, right? But the effect of a suicide bomber, having spoken that, having recorded a message to the population, a young, brimming with confidence kind of a boy strapped up with the explosives, someone like the Pulwama bomber, having killed 40 of our brave Jawans in an action like that. So these things, to my mind, may be restricted, but I don't think this is going to be completely removed from the whole scope of these kind of operations. The coming of technologies is definitely going to help. It will help. It will develop even further. What you've just seen is a very, very crude attempt. What you saw in Jammu. You saw a rather sophisticated attempt which happened at the Aramco refinery in Saudi Arabia, where I think a total of 6 or 7 drones were used, and a number of missiles were used along with them. Right? You can imagine a situation where swarms of these drones are used, and you do not have the sufficient technologies to counter it completely. These counter technologies are developing. They will take their time alongside it. But if they don't have it, there will be windows in which you'll find the capability of the terrorists to strike and not be neutralized so easily will be there. Although subsequently the counter technologies will catch up. So you're going to find a period of time in the near future, in the next 5, 6, 7, 10 years, where the drone will be a very, very effective weapon for terrorists. And this is something that we have to take stock of, because we've got, our borders are very, very vulnerable. It's not just the borders alone. This can happen anywhere in any part of the country. It can happen against cantonments. It can happen against government institutions, buildings, training institutions of any organizations. I mean, you just say it and that is a target. Ultimately, it's a question of striking and taking credit for it. Now, what we have seen in the case of the Jammu attack has been that you have not seen any credit being taken for it, which has been a strange thing, because I think the aspect of deniability was much more important here. But in future, when you find these kind of strikes taking place, you will probably see demonstrations being done and claims being made by multiple organizations to perhaps create even more confusion around. Yeah.
Evolutionaries, I must say, they are finding new and new ways of guiding into the same principle at the end of it. So we were talking about terrorism, and one can't actually leave out Pakistan once we talk about terrorism. They've got their own issues right now, and a whole lot is happening there. But when we look at China, sir, and the situation in Ladakh, it is pretty evident, whatever the situation tactically on the ground is, strategically, China has come into a place, and it also realizes that it's pretty much a stalemate with regards to any counter movements here and there because of the deployment which is there from both the faces. So when pushed into a corner like this, and I would say so because for China being such a large country, when they are forced up by India, it's probably in a sense pushing them into a corner. You also mentioned that the Chinese have opportunities to do sub-conventional warfare in India. Do you see that happening directly in the future in some time, or do you see it being directed from Pakistan towards India, using it as a proxy that you mentioned again earlier?
You see, one of the strengths of China definitely has been its capability in terms of information warfare, psychological warfare. As we are aware, the 2003 concept, the three strategies concept, three wars concept, as it's called, media war, legal war, and cyber war. That's the essence of their strategy. Although they back it up with a huge conventional force acting as a deterrent, right? So that's the broad concept which they are following. The Chinese learned the lessons very early in 1990. They learned the lessons from the Gulf War I. They adopted a doctrine called war under informationalized conditions in 1993. So they are one of the first few nations to have actually gone very professional as far as information warfare and psychological warfare is concerned. It's not something which they are going to give up very easily. We are seeing how professionally they are doing it. For example, the cultivation of media in the United States. Recently, you must have read the kind of money which has been used by China to buy off certain media houses to make sure that there's a footprint of Chinese opinion expressed in certain major newspapers in America and things like that. Now, if they can go to that extent, they can go to various other things, lots of other things. They may be slightly crude in their understanding of Indian culture and things like that, but let me tell you, there's a tremendous amount of research going on within China about India. And they're studying us all the time, although sinology is an important subject in India too, but not as intense. We need in India, let me jump the gun and say it here only, we need in India to study China much more intensely than we have studied it so far. So I think the Chinese are at the moment testing us. The situation internationally, geopolitically is such that there's a reset taking place in the world order, particularly with the pandemic in position at the moment and the post-pandemic situation. Lots of nations with drop in their economic capabilities, etc. You're going to find the overall reset. You're going to find a shift from Middle East, from Afghanistan to the Indo-Pacific. How exactly all this takes place is going to be a matter of time and space. How will it really happen? We still cannot predict. In the middle of this, the Chinese I don't think, are going to upset anything by trying to take on India, for example, in a needless war, a conventional war of any kind. What they did in 2020, I still believe, was essentially messaging, essentially tying you down, trying to tell you that you are too ambitious and perhaps you do not have the capability which China has. They were a little suspicious of the capability which has been on display as far as India is concerned and India's leadership is concerned since about 2015-16, which showed that the Indian strategic capability to think strategic and take decisions was improving by the day. This was worrying them. Doklam, for example, the decision to go in for Balakot and things like that, this was worrying them. So they decided to go in for teaching us perhaps a primary lesson. We imagined that this was war, although I'm sure the top army leadership was very, very clear right in the beginning that this is only limited action which is underway as far as Ladakh is concerned. So will this in the future lead to just a stalemate in Ladakh or nothing being done on the borders, etc.? No. I think there are going to be pinpricks on the border from time to time, with a lot of denial, with a lot of accusations against you, and simultaneously there will be efforts to do you down internationally. Internationally, through the information warfare route, through the cyber warfare route, demonstrations of the type we saw in December last year, when you saw the Mumbai power grid, for example, which came down for some time. We were told that this was one of the efforts made by China. So these demonstrations will continue to essentially tell you, you're not as good as China. You are number two. Don't look at yourself as number one. No, this is the awkwardness about it all. I don't think we are looking at any major conventional wars, but the sub-conventional part is important, and China will play its game its own way, not the manner in which it is known to play, getting in and doing terrorist attacks and things like that. These are other ways. This is all gray zone warfare. This is all gray zone warfare where you will be looking at populations, looking at political cleavages between societies here and there, trying to expand that and creating disarray within the Indian nation.
That is very interesting. So that's the China way. That's what you would describe.
That's exactly that's the modern way, I would say, today. Making use of networks today.
So one thing actually came to my mind, and I'd not like to actually mention newspaper. When the 100th anniversary of the CCP was being celebrated in China, one of the leading newspapers in India had a double-page congratulatory, I won't call it ad, but it was a print which was there. And when you mention what they did and the kind of money they've spent with, various different organizations, if I may, one actually realizes that they are also, in a way, penetrating within the information system of India as well. Would you agree to something like that, sir?
Absolutely, 100% with you. And I did notice that at that particular time. China has the funds, it's got the capability and outreach. And of course, today's information technologies allows you to have that type of outreach. So the Chinese have built up a whole army of civilian information warriors who are monitoring you, studying your culture, studying your languages, probably recommending to their masters the various methodologies by which they can affect you psychologically, right? Make you feel smaller, make you feel less confident, probably address your economy. There are any number of ways by which they can continue to do it. And as you pointed out very correctly, penetrating your information system to create cleavages in your society, this aspect of left versus right and things like that, this is an inherently dangerous thing, which we should be extremely careful about.
A lot of food for thought, sir, I must say. Sir, sub-conventional warfare, especially with 3 nuclear neighbors, and India is the only, India is the only country in the world which has 2 nuclear-armed neighbors on either side of its shoulder. Looking at that, and you very rightly pointed out, China with its own situation today would not like to open up a whole front as a conventional warfare system. You explained to us how Pakistan is doing what they're trying to do. They're trying to change its tactics to have larger impacts and stuff like that. Chinese with their information systems. I want to ask you this, sir, because at the end of it, this is not going to, we won't blink our eye one fine day and go away, or we won't wake up from our sleep and say that was all a bad dream. This is going to go and it's going to become worse and worse and worse. And we are seeing that happening in front of us. How do you think we need to reorganize ourselves? Because at the end of it, a counter has to be done. And we are pretty slow at it. I won't be ashamed to admit that. So how do you think we should reorganize, rethink our strategy, and reapply the resources that we've got, sir?
That's a fair question, absolutely. And I think we need to state right at the beginning that if you make yourself vulnerable, your adversary is going to exploit. So how do you ensure that your vulnerabilities are reduced, almost made zero? You have a long shopping list which you can go into. For example, good governance, good and caring governance. Good and caring governance is something which will ensure that societies, there's no turbulence in society. When there's no turbulence in society, the possibility of exploiting cleavages, exploiting differences in society, etc., becomes very remote. Carrying all, the Prime Minister's very famous slogan, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vishwas, taking everyone with you. Translating that on the ground is a beautiful slogan. Translating that on the ground is for different people to understand and implement. It's the bureaucracy, it's the military leadership, it's the political community which needs to look at this. Because if India has to stand on its own and be counted among the major powers of the world, we are a middle power today and we aspire to be a big power of the future. You can't have that with cleavages within your society. The United States today has got huge cleavages in its society, right? But they've already achieved the status of being a superpower. So these things can be papered over. Although you've seen last year and a half, how the whole issue of societal differences have actually paralyzed America at various times. It has affected it internally in a huge way. The coming of President Trump, for example, had created a lot of problems within America. Now, in India, we need to be conscious of this. We are a developing society. We are at the same time a very diverse society, and therefore our unity, political unity and consensus. Of course, politics is all about differences. But at the end of the day, there has to be a bottom line, below which you will not go. There has to be a consensus on national security issues. I always quote the famous example of 1994, when India was under intense pressure, international pressure on Kashmir. And we found Prime Minister Narasimha Rao and then the later Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee Sahab coming together, bringing all the political parties together, and then passing a joint resolution in Parliament on 22nd of February 1994 that the whole of Jammu and Kashmir, every territory of Jammu and Kashmir belongs to India. That was political consensus at its best. It was a clear message to the world, don't meddle with us on Kashmir. We will not accept anything below this bottom line. That was very, very clear. So I think today we need to see how can we build political consensus on certain national security issues. You can't be seen to be having differences of opinion as far as national security is concerned. Then, of course, since we have discussed subconventional warfare to such a great extent, it must be remembered by society that fighting subconventional war is not the responsibility of the Indian Army. It is a responsibility of every citizen.
Yes. Because
subconventional, it penetrates every aspect of society. It goes into your economy. It goes into your education system. It goes into everything. You have to fight it internally to make sure. To think that just eliminating the terrorist or eliminating an anti-national element is what is counter subconventional war, then I think we are mistaken. So this is an aspect, the all of government approach, the whole of nation approach. Every single citizen is a warrior of India. Next one is we have to understand the power of information warfare. As we go along, we haven't even seen the tip of social media yet. What all social media can do, we haven't even seen it. We have just seen the first stages of this war against Twitter and this and that. These are internally, these are issues which will continue taking place as part of governance. But the more animosity kind of actions which social media can bring to bear, we cannot even conceive as to what that may be. So we need to develop the systems, and for that you can't develop. You can't depend on the armed forces or the central armed police forces to say they are the ones trained and they will fight the subconventional war. No, you have to ensure a coordination between for the development of different systems between the scientific institutions, the educational institutions, the youth of India, the various economic powerhouses within India, industrial houses within India. As I was saying, it's an all of government approach, it's an all of institutional approach. And that's the only way ultimately it'll happen. That's the only way that you will develop such a strong societal response to this whole thing. You can't leave it to a few institutions to fight it. It has to be a societal response. That's the only way it can happen. And very, very important is this aspect of partnerships between the security forces, between the government and youth. These are social kind of partnerships, understanding each other, dealing with each other, right? Making sure that technologies are understood. And last part of my remedy for it is an improvement in the strategic culture of the country. We are a nation which is very trusting. We are a trusting nation. We trust people in general. But that makes us vulnerable too. And therefore, our broad understanding of our society is that the responsibility of national security is that of someone else. That can't be allowed to. That cannot be allowed to remain. You have to ensure that everyone takes on national security as his responsibility.
Absolutely, sir. I 100% agree. And as a matter of fact, I personally believe that strategic discussions should become a part of general discourse, as per se, general talks that we have. We should not say, China aa gaya yaar, kya kare, and all that. We must also talk about what it's doing. Whole lot of
let me admit that there's been a marked change in the last 5-6 years, I think. I am participating in an event. I'm refusing events almost every day because I don't have time to do it. But thankfully, at least efforts are being made. But these efforts are still, I would say, insufficient.
Far and few. Yes, sir. Far and few in between. Absolutely, sir. As a matter of fact, I don't see any such discourse happening in the mainstream media, as per se. We're not talking strategic values. We're not trying to educate our... a lot of people actually ask, when I did a video on Afghanistan, some people actually commented, why are we in Afghanistan? What do we have to get from there? Why are we putting our taxpayers' money there? The understanding of long-term thoughts and long-term strategic values to counter certain things, to counter certain narratives, and to counter certain moves is kind of very, very low, sir. But I must say this, with a lot of people like yourself included, and I would say I've been watching you for a long time and got a huge amount of interest into especially the region of Jammu and Kashmir with a lot of things that you wrote and spoke about. This culture, and I agree with you, is building up. There are a lot of the armed forces retired as well as expert who are now talking. YouTube has become a big medium for people to start getting educated on these kind of things. One thing I really appreciate this entire thing because it gives us a new forte into what's happening around us. So, my last question, and you are quite a renowned voice in terms of Kashmir is concerned. And I can't let you go, although we wanted to talk about warfare in particular, but I can't let you go without asking you a question on Kashmir as to what's happening today. We see a lot of political movement. We see a lot of counter narratives which are being created from the other side, although some of it misfired, fair enough, but there is an effort from the other side to do something. Alongside, there is peace on the line of control. There is a lot which is happening around it. How would you decipher the situation and how do you see it going forward?
See, Adi, very briefly, the 5th of August 2019 decisions were landmark decisions. I'm convinced they were landmark decisions. Till that time, we continued to treat Kashmir very, very differently. Jammu and Kashmir, the whole issue of Jammu. We thought solutions will emerge. They can emerge with consultation with Pakistan, etc., as long as Pakistan can abjure violence and abjure terrorism and things like that. We were always also investing in things like the Hurriyat, to say that, yes, they are the people who will probably come back and participate in elections. And, we were underwriting their treatment and underwriting the education of their children and all kinds of things we were doing like that in the hope. We were all living in hopes. There was no one who was taking action to do things. And on the top of that, Pakistan decided to interfere and play out its so-called a war of 1,000 cuts. And we really had no answers, except for killing terrorists, trying to stop terrorists from coming in. We really had nothing proactive going. We had never attempted to try and counter the networks which had been laid all over Jammu and Kashmir, right? All around us, which are there very strongly even today, right? And the manner in which the media was functioning, the most anti-national media. And we as a democratic nation, we were showing ourselves as a model nation to the world. The manner in which we were accepting and tolerating what was being written in that media every other day, right? It used to infuriate a lot of soldiers of mine or officers of mine, and I used to have to calm them down. I said, don't worry, we are playing our game in a slightly different way. I think this realization came around about 2017, 18, 19, that now this game has to change. And the game changed completely with 5th of August decisions. 370, which was promoting separatism to an extent, right? It was promoting the idea of being a different identity other than India. That aspect had to be removed. It was removed. And now there's an effort going on with demands to say that should be restored. To my mind, that cannot happen. It will never happen, right? But having taken those brave decisions and actually even had some good diplomatic achievements of explaining this to the world has generally been on your side on this. At the end of the day, the pandemic came in the last 1.5 years has come in in a very big way, has come in between normalizing the situation in Jammu and Kashmir. Now, when I say normalizing, it's a term within inverted commas for the simple reason, remember, the absence of violence is not normalcy.
Yeah.
The absence of violence is not normalcy. Normalcy is sustained peace with no potential to return to the situation which exists. Which means the next 3-4 years, you must have sustained peace. Your networks must be completely neutralized. The possibility of interference by Pakistan and additional and extraneous elements internally in Jammu and Kashmir must be completely neutralized. This is what everyone is working on at the moment as far as the security forces are concerned. In the middle of all this, I think the government of India realized that there's an important aspect of the political color. If you remember, in the 90s, even at the beginning of this whole so-called low intensity war or some conventional war, within 7 years in 1996, India conducted elections in Jammu and Kashmir. After doing an exercise of delimitation in 1995, most people do not know that we did delimitation in 1995. We increased the number of seats in the assembly, and 1996 we went for elections. Right? Now the same process is being done. Delimitation is being done, and we're looking to fight to conduct the assembly election so that Jammu and Kashmir can have its own democratically elected government. whether it be a national conference government or a BJP government, how does it make a difference? As long as it is a government democratically elected. Because that's what we believe in India. Now, to give that democratic color, to give that political color, it is important to have consultations. And that's exactly what is going on today. And to expect that with one single session, with one single meeting, everyone is going to have a meeting of minds and everyone is going to come out to the same wavelength is something impossible. That's not even expected. So you see in the 24th of July, 24th of June, you had this meeting. It was conducted under very nice, congenial kind of conditions. But when they went back, the leaders, they've spoken a lot against the government. This will happen. This is up and down will happen. So everyone is looking at how to maximize the political space.
Yeah,
I would do it. If I was heading a political party, I would attempt to maximize my political space. So this issue is going to continue, and India should be happy it is continuing. It's a very democratic thing which is happening. And I'm sure that the whole process of delimitation, as today we've heard, is going to be completed by March next year. And we should be heading for elections sometime in the later part of 2022. Now, if I say that this is the end of the Jammu and Kashmir problem, sorry, that's not so. You still got your two adversaries sitting on the other side. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. The potential for this to return remains high. You have to make sure that you create the conditions of governance, create the conditions of administration, and ensure security of the highest order. Build up the youth potential, build up the aspirations of the youth, bring in gender sensitivity to make sure there is women empowerment, all these kind of things. It is the social, the political, and the economic, which is far more important than the military. Everyone thinks Jammu and Kashmir, and they look at the Indian army. They start looking at my face and say, you are the man who can do it. No, I'm not the man who can do it. This has to be done by the people. It has to be done through the political, socio-economic.
I think, sir, the aspect of a whole of nation approach is something that you're bringing out pretty much. This is the second time you've brought out, and this is something which tells me that this is the way forward. There is nothing else left. We have to unite as a country with regards, no matter what our thought process are, but national security has to be, supreme. Center stage,
absolutely.
Absolutely, sir. So this has been an eye-opening of a talk, let me assure you, because you've kind of given us a peek into the future of starting with conventional warfare and how things have changed over time and how we actually look at it going forward, to the point where you've also talked to us about the sub-conventional aspect of it, and you also hinted upon what the effects of such activities are today, how they've actually developed over time from Pakistan using Fidains to the kind of attack that we see today. We've also discussed how the Chinese, that is one of the most interesting things that I think interesting parts of the talk have intruded, and it have literally spread their fingers into our society and trying to achieve whatever they want to. One thing I've understood is that the Pakistanis use terrorism as their sub-conventional war. The Chinese do what they're doing in terms of getting into our system and using our systems against us, the three warfare strategy of the Chinese. And that was explained by the general very, very clearly. Finally, of course, I could not resist asking a question about Kashmir. Underlining fact that, the dissent that was shown by some post the meeting with the Prime Minister, as a matter of fact, shows the fact that they are still free. To all the detractors who say that these guys are on the chains and this and that. But the dissent right outside the Prime Minister's residence after this particular meeting shows the fact that there is still free thought in that place. And opposition is pretty much a normal process of what we all as a country are trying to achieve. Thank you so much, sir. This has been a wonderful talk. I would, be honored and grateful for an opportunity sometime in the future for another talk, another day, another subject.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, absolutely, for me too. Jai Hind to you and to all your viewers.
Jai Hind, sir.